Alright, hello, this is our first video for the weekend of October 8th and 9th. This is us starting Unit 4 entitled Jacksonian Democracy, because a lot of what happens in this time period is affected by the people, Andrew Jackson himself and the people in and around him as well too. So we're kind of and we're not just looking at the politics in this unit. This one's kind of a unique unit. We're going to look at the politics from about the 1820s to 1840s, but that's only one chapter of this unit. Whereas other units has been almost the whole thing. This unit, we're looking at the politics for one chapter, but then in chapters 14, 15, and 16, we're going to be looking at a lot of different cultural and economic aspects of America in this time. We're looking how life in America changes from the 1800s until about 1840s and 50s or so. But like I said, first we're going to start with the politics and kind of see where we progress here in America. So anyway, changes in politics will parallel the complex social and economic changes that are happening in this time period. America is going through a big growth time, especially after the War 1812, and you really start to see new identities and a lot of different ideas, new generations taking over and so forth. And America itself has become a very unique place since the creation of the country. One of our other visitors, so we met Quebecois back in the colonial days. Now you have our next visitor, Alexis de Tocqueville, who you probably have heard of more so than Quebecois. Tocqueville tours the United States around this time period, 1810s, 1820s, and he writes a series of diary entries and letters and so forth to basically chronicle his time here. Eventually it gets turned into a book entitled Democracy in America. So it comes out in 1835. In that book he talks about, he's amazed by the informal and democratic attitudes of Americans, about how a lot of the people in America aren't dressed up all the time or dressed up to their best abilities, even the rich class. And there's kind of it's hard to tell the difference between the rich and the poor, so to speak. There's kind of more of a blending, and we are very informal. We don't have all these European customs that they have over there. He's also Tocqueville, of course, is from Europe, France particularly. So he was amazed that classes, higher, middle, lower classes all ate together. They travel together. You find them traveling on steamships. You find them traveling in common on roads. There wasn't this big giant class distinction. These are all things that he highlights inside of his writings. And they all operate and work together and live together in various communities. One big change. So that's Tocqueville. So if you see his name, you'll at least know that he writes and offers this commentary about how society, here in America is different in this time period. What you're also going to see characteristic of this Jacksonian democracy time period is that white males will begin to seek equality across the board. This is the time where we shift from white male property owners having a say in government to now having white males in general having a say in government. So it's kind of a conundrum here, though, because at the same time you're having white males fighting for greater representation and greater equality. White males north and south are still oppressing and limiting African Americans in general. But there's a lot of emphasis on this time on the self-made man and what he can bring to the table, and getting the self-made man more into politics as a result too, which leads us to white male suffrage. So one of the biggest changes in the Jacksonian period, 1820s, 1830s era, is you're going to see a massive change in the voting, who can vote in the United States. Vast amounts of middle and lower class white males begin to vote more. So because of the changes of politics here. So more middle and lower class whites, ones that don't necessarily have to own property, or who don't own property, will start to be able to vote. For example, in 1824, the election after Monroe, you have 350,000 people voting. So in 1824, you have 350,000 voting. Fast forward about 15 years to 1840, and it becomes 2.4 million people voting in America. So a dramatic shift in 15 years where you get more of this average white male citizen, as they call it, the common man. The more common man begins to have a say in government, and the government begins to represent more of them. Western states have a huge impact on this. As people migrate out west, in those states, everybody's starting off poor, no one's rich, no one's established, so everyone has to go out there at the same time work the same amount of ways, as far as to make it, and that's rich, poor, whoever you are. And so whenever they begin to develop states out there like Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, Kentucky, they're much more willing to give the vote to all males and require no property requirements to be able to vote, because everyone essentially is more equalized out there in these western frontier states. So the western states were the first ones to hold or to allow white males to vote and hold office that had no properties. After that, eastern states followed suit, and this is the whole common man, the rise of the common man. That it starts with the West. And I know you can't really see this that well. I'll try to kind of focus this in a little better. I have a map here, and I can show you this maybe when we get back. It shows you on this map in 1800, pretty much every colony, every state requires some kind of property requirement, except for Kentucky. And you get to 1830, a lot of the western states are yellow, so they're being shown as being no property requirements. And then by 1860, pretty much all the states have moved away from any kind of property requirement whatsoever. So that's a big shift in this time period, moving away state by state away from the property requirements, and the increase of the power and influence of the common man. Next is the party nominating conventions. This is the first nominating conventions. This is when the first political party conventions developed, is in this time period. The way that candidates got elected originally, like back in Washington's Jefferson days, is that candidates would be picked by state legislatures or by some kind of closed-door nomination process. So basically, the top party officials would select your leaders, and you would just get to vote on them if you could. Like we said, Electoral College picked the president. Senators of this time period, U.S. senators were picked by the state legislature. So those people were the ones who selected the nominees, the candidates. So the common man, the average people, had very little say. So one of the ways that this era reflects the common man is that you have these political party conventions come out. They give more of the average citizen a say in government. By the 1830s, caucuses, which you learned about last year, caucuses begin to be replaced by nominating conventions, which you still see that today, the Republican and Democratic National Convention, but they're nowhere nearly the same as they used to be. Nowadays, the conventions are just kind of for show, but back in those days, actually where the candidates got picked. So you might not know who the candidate's going to be until the convention itself. You might arrive with like 3 or 4 people in mind, but no one knew at the convention who was going to be picked. Party politicians and voters would gather in large hall meetings to nominate their candidates. Like you see kind of today on TV, you have members of different states would come together, and as a convention, they would form these voting groups and basically eventually pick a candidate. So at the convention, you can have party officials, but also you can have more common people, more middle class or even lower class people come and join it, and these people together can have more of a say in voting. Now, it's not like direct primaries today or as free as it is today, but that was a big step to where more common man type people could have a say in nominating their candidates. The very first political party to hold a nominating convention was the Anti-Mason Party, which was a third party that becomes prominent around 1830. The Anti-Mason Party, as in the Freemasons, as in like the secret cult society Freemasons that like George Washington was part of, and like all of Washington, D.C. and so forth was designed by and so forth. So it's a lot of conspiracy theories with the Masons. But the Anti-Mason Party, being a third party, only had one platform, and that was not to allow Masons into office, which you can pretty much figure out. All right, the next is the two-party system. So we're not going to go into too much detail at this moment, but we're going to see the resurrection of the two-party system in this time period. With elections becoming national affairs, because now it's not just the elites voting. Now you have more states involved, you have more common people involved, and as you have more people involved in these elections, there's going to be a whole lot more different ideas and concepts and wants represented, and so that leads to more parties, or basically, it leads to more parties, 2 new mainstream parties, and of course some third parties as well too. Debates over federal power, national versus state government, authority of national government, and the responsibilities of each state versus national still are going to shape the party. So some of those same concerns you had back with the Federalists and Democratic Republicans will now be extrapolated with more people involved, and you're going to see the parties get more involved. You're going to see the resurrection of two parties and also some other random third parties in this time period too. You also have the development of popular elections in this time too. In the presidential election of 1832, which is one that Jackson's going to win, only South Carolina uses the old electors system chosen by the state legislature. So by 1832, the states are now basically letting their people who can vote, and the electors will vote based on how people vote, like it is now. Whenever you have, when you go cast your ballot for president, Louisiana, which has 8 electoral votes, however the state goes, the entire state will go that direction, Republican or Democrat. So all our votes go in that way. That's what happens here in this time period. One by one, it starts with the western states, and it becomes more prominent with the eastern states. But they're going to let everybody vote for president, and then however the people vote majority, that's how they're going to cast all their electoral votes. So by 1832, only South Carolina was still doing the old way, where electors were choosing for the people instead of having people actually go out and vote. So now you're seeing popular elections that influence the candidates, influence the elections. Now states allow voters to choose the electors for president. So like I said, whoever gets the most votes, that's where the electors' votes will go towards, like the Electoral College for president. So many more offices just besides president, senators, congressmen, governors, and so forth, they will be elected based on popular votes as opposed to people who are appointed. So our first video will stop right here.